I'd like to begin by saying how thankful I am to be here, how humbled I am to be here for the McGee Leadership Institute, of course, the community of this school district that's allowed me to be here and do this thing for a while. The other day, my captain, Dave Nicholas, walked up and handed me some gift and said, "So, a quarter of a century." And then shook my hand, and I was like, okay, well, when you see it like that, dude, it's like I've been here forever or something. The obvious great thank you goes as well to a community that's allowed me to stay in the same place and work for a while. And I'm very, very grateful for that. I want to begin, though, by kind of framing my comments. And I want to start, first of all, by just reading some lines of poetry. I mean, anyone that's studied with me or knows me knows that I usually am going to defer to a poet or two. Sorry, it's just the, it's the craft, okay? So, the great American poet Walt Whitman speaks as a teacher towards a student and says the following, and I think this will be the basis of our conversation as leaders within our community. He says, "I know I have the best of time and space and was never measured and never will be measured. Each man and each woman of you I lead upon a knoll, my left hand hooking you around the waist, my right hand pointing to landscapes of continents and public road. Not I, not anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it for yourself. It's not far, it's within reach. Perhaps you've been on it since you were born and did not know. You're also asking me questions, and I hear you. I answer, I cannot answer. You must find out for yourself. Long enough have you dreamed contemptible dreams. Now I wash the gum from your eyes. You must have it yourself to the dazzle of the light in every moment of your life. Long have you timidly waited, holding a plank by the shore. Now I will you to be a bold swimmer, to jump off in the midst of the sea, rise again, nod to me, shout, and laughingly dash with your hair. I am the teacher of athlete swimmers. He that by me spreads a wider breast than my own proves the width of my own. He most honors my style, who learns under it to destroy the teacher." I decided that I would call this brief talk to you, "Destroy the Teacher, Perspectives on Education in the 21st Century, Assessment and Vision." Assessment and Vision. Now there's a couple of things that I have to get out of the way really quickly, as I always get out of the way with my students when I speak to them, because sometimes teachers can come across as being so confident about the things they say. So I'm going to inject really quickly the study and the observation that we will call, of course, in philosophy, epistemology, how we know stuff. There's fundamentally three ways you can say you know something, right? So for example, you can say, I absolutely am certain about what I'm saying. I'm right, everybody else who disagrees with me is wrong. And of course, while this position can make us feel sometimes comfortable, we are also aware that it can lead to people flying planes into buildings and they fall down and that kind of thing. So some of us are a little bit reluctant to have that absolutist position, epistemologically speaking. And so, well, on the other end of the continuum is the relativist position. There are no absolutes, there is no truth. I like quickly to point out to my students to say that there are no absolutes is an absolute assertion. I know absolutely there are no absolutes. You can kind of see what we call the performative contradiction, and the relativist position falls flat. So it oftentimes pushes people back to the absolutist position because they don't want to hold the relativist position. I like to teach from the middle position. That is to say, what I will call the fallibilist position. And about that, it simply sounds like this. About everything I'm about to say, and I talk on this subject now probably more than I should, I like to point out, about everything I'm about to say, I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. And I'm going to kind of wait and kind of look for more data sets, and when those come to me, I'm going to say, oh, okay. So and I back off of that position. You got me? So in other words, as I talk, I'm hoping that you will understand that even though I seem to sound like I'm really certain about what I'm talking about, I want to begin by saying that when you're talking about teaching kids and being leaders of young people in the 21st century, which by the way is what all of us are doing, right? We are really engaged in an activity that we're not always sure about where we're going and what we're doing. Having said that, the other thing I want to say is that it's a pretty good idea for leaders, all of us count ourselves in this community, to understand what we call the is-ought dichotomy. That is to say, when we look at the world, we have fundamentally two perspectives of that world. One is the way the world is. The other is the way the world ought to be. And very regularly when I talk about, education, especially with educators, and we all kind of take our jobs very seriously, you see, there's always this debate about whether we're talking about the way things really are versus the way things maybe should be. Do you know what I'm saying? I think leaders have to understand both sides of that equation. It's like a coin with two sides. Good leaders have a capacity to have honestly able to kind of think about the past and look at it, as the way it happened, and take some, credit or not so much credit for that, and then begin to work forward towards the vision. And that's why I said that I'm going to call this small talk "Destroy the Teacher" assessment, looking backwards, and then vision, looking forwards, as we think about maybe what it means to be a leader in the 21st century. There's a couple of statistics that blow my mind. I was just thinking about this. The kids who will start kindergarten this fall, in 12, 13 years, my math is right, roughly 2026, will join me at the senior year, at the senior level, when we're in high school. And that will put me very close to 40 years in a classroom, and that makes me feel really strange. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? As I kind of start to put into perspective what it even is that I'm talking about. Fundamentally, you could say that what I'm really here to speak of is what I think those young people entering our classrooms for the first time this fall, what I think I understand about where they're coming from and the world that they're about to enter and going towards, and then in some ways how we as leaders stand in the center to facilitate, maybe you would say, that evolution, that growth, that maturity. With that in mind, I want to talk about, really quickly, these kids. The first thing I think we have to point out is that we're the ones who created these young people as critical thinkers. If you talk to anybody who spends time with kids, and I started asking this question many years ago when I came into the classroom, I would walk up to anybody who I called an old-timer who had been doing it for 20 years. Ouch. And I said, okay, you've been doing this thing for 20 years. Are kids today different from what they were 20 years ago? I was interested in the answer. And it was amazing. With ubiquity, they all would answer to that, yeah, they're way different. And then when I would ask, like, how are they different? They would say, well, kids today have no respect for authority. This would be a catch-all answer, when I would ask them this. And of course, I would sometimes venture the second question, why do you think they are this way? Like, what? And then I would just sit back and listen to old-timers start talking, and I was just, taking notes, trying to collect data as I went. And one of the reasons why I continue to enjoy working in this district is that I'm not only allowed to be an instructor, but I'm also allowed to be a researcher. That is to say, to try to figure out what's going on. And the district also allows me to do quite a bit of traveling, so I get to see other parts of America and the world. And everywhere I go, I ask the same question. Okisho High School in Okinawa, I will ask. Top high school in all of Asia, I will ask. Do you see any difference in the last 24? Oh, yes. How are they different? Oh, respect. Before, Okisho High School put no names on the back of their baseball players. They had the #1 baseball team for a long time. Now kids want their names on the back. Why? Because the recruiters from the Major League Baseball come to watch and they want their name. See, so there's a fundamental shift that's occurring all over the place. But the first point I want to make about this is, we kind of created this. I mean, think about it. Maybe the most influential individual of the 20th century at the end of it was Steve Jobs, of course, right? I mean, we could argue that his work changed forever the landscape of not only our lives, but our kids' lives, agreed? The really interesting question to me is, though, who was teaching Steve Jobs when he was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old? Because whoever was teaching Steve Jobs is responsible, wow, that's a scary word, for whatever it is that he did going forward, yes? And one of the things that was happening in education at the time that Steve Jobs was coming through was make them think critically about everything, okay? Well, the byproduct of this, I think we're beginning to kind of start to understand in some way. I want to talk a little bit about kind of what that means.
Any time that you talk with coaches, I mean, I like to talk with coaches a lot. Anytime you talk to coaches or referees, they will say this to you. Kids today have a different understanding of what it means to be coached. You cannot coach them the same way. I've heard this from the old-time coaches a lot. You cannot coach them the same way. It does not work. Begs the obvious question. Well, what's up? What happened with these kids? When I've been asked to talk about this recently, I've said that I think it makes sense to look at kind of two perspectives in regards to the kids that we work with today. The first has to do with maybe what we would call some of the challenges. Many will hear what I'm about to say as negative. I hope that you don't, because when I speak about it, I don't necessarily see it as negative, but I think I'm right when I say certainly there is an adjustment in behavior patterns by virtue of these things, right? And then I like to talk about some of the positive kinds of things that have as well happened for these kids. In other words, I don't want to just be a downer here and just talk about how terrible everything is, et cetera, et cetera. But I think when you look at the young people that we're working with, the young people who will start school in the fall, I like to talk about them as being affected by the loosening or the waning, or some will even use the extreme word, the loss, although I don't like to go that far, of three, what I'm going to call institutions of stability, okay? Institutions of stability. Now, I think you understand what I mean when I use the term stability. That is to say, I know where I am. I know where I am, okay? And as I talk, feel free if you want to kind of write some of this down and then start to make notes off to the side. And at the end, if we have time, we can even maybe discuss a bit of it, because actually I'm not here to present. I'm really here to research. Sorry about that. But that's really why I'm here. I'm really interested to know, as I talk about this, I always like to get through my comments quickly so that I can hear from you, because what you have to say on this topic is far more interesting to me than what I have to say, because I kind of know what I have to say. You see what I'm saying? So let's talk about these three institutions of stability. I'm going to use the term waning. That is to say, the reducing of some force in the student's life. Okay? And I call them in order family, church, and state. And I'll talk about all three of them, okay? Now, often when I start talking like this, people immediately, kind of peg me as some kind of arch conservative and all these kinds of things. Please feel free to call me that if you want to. Lots of people have. But I think for me, it's fairly self-evident that when you just start to look at the evidence and the data sets that are there, let's just start with family. I mean, I remember it vividly. I've now raised 3 children. They've all left home. I'm very sad about that, so I won't talk anymore about that, but I'm happy about that as well. But I remember when my Annie came to me as a very, very young girl, and she said, "Daddy, are you and Mommy going to get a divorce? And am I going to have to choose which one of the two of you I have to live with?" And I was like, whoa, I didn't think that there was any kind of, serious matrimonial cracks, at least being seen by my young daughter. And I said, "Honey, what would you?" "Well, that's what happened to my friend, and last night she had to choose where she goes, and I'm just interested to know, am I going to have to make that choice?" Now, what I would say about this is, what happened of course, from the 50s on, has been much chronicled and talked about. But I think what has been missed in the conversation is that young people of all ages began to kind of get a sense that the stability that was forever kind of understood as being there, if not in reality, certainly in our mythic imaginations, began to wane. And young people began to look at relationships from a different perspective. They saw the relationships between a man and a woman in a marriage and a family and that kind of thing as being, in some ways, changed over time. So that, for example, in movies, you might have these idyllic kinds of families, but that was even more to drive home the point that this is not the way the real world works. What was the byproduct of this? I think one of them, quite frankly, was that young people began to have to become increasingly more self-reliant because they began to understand that maybe that was out there waiting. Planted a seed, even in my Annie's mind, who never had to deal with the issue of divorce or remarriage or splitting up or all of that. But that's become a part of our culture. And I don't know that there's any way to go back to another time. Do you? I just don't see that happening so easily. And so our young people will start school in the fall with that as an understanding. What's an immediate byproduct of that? The teacher will come in first grade, will look at a young person and say, "Trust me, because I'm the teacher." But the only people, adults in the student's life who have ever said that maybe ended up, not so much. See what I'm saying? Or in my Annie's case, even if her own parents, maybe they're her pals, that is to say, adults can't always be trusted. Or to what degree can they be trusted? See, question. And that's what I mean by these institutions of stability starting to kind of wobble a little bit. Let me give you another example. The second institution of stability, the church. Now there is all kinds of data out there that says that young people today are entering our schools with a different understanding of what it means to belong to some kind of religious institution. The easiest way, by the way, to say this and to ask this is to ask even the most religious of our students, okay, you're religious? You believe in it? Yes, I do. But do you believe in it as strongly as your great-great-grandma did? Okay. Do you believe in it like that? And our statistics show time and again, students will say, yeah, no, not like that. Do you got me? Do you understand what we're saying? In 1999, a fascinating book was published by the Dalai Lama, of all people. I mean, you could argue, you know, one of the more religious people on the planet. He writes this book. In the introduction of this book, he says two things. One, he says, I have an idea that in the 21st century, if young people derive morals at all, it isn't going to come from their affiliation with a religious group. Now that's an interesting observation made by one of the more religious people on this planet. Would you agree with me? And even though I don't completely agree with a lot of what the Dalai Lama says, that was a challenge to me because he said the second thing. If you'll think about it, young people will, if they derive morals at all, ethics, morals, they will derive it from observing adults in their life, and namely, he crossed the line, and he said teachers. Whoa. And I remember vividly reading this book saying, how dare he say that? I mean, that's, you know what I'm saying? That is a lot of responsibility to put on the backs of an instructor. Dude, I thought I was just teaching Shakespeare, and now you're telling me I'm saving the planet? You know what I'm saying? And yet, notice all of it prefaced from this idea that young people are increasingly not affiliating as much with the religious groups of their parents, their grandparents. And because I wear lots of hats, and one of those is as theologian, I have these conversations with parents who are deeply concerned. They're just not, they're not into it. They're not into it at all. And we're trying everything, and they're just not into it. I had a student came to me the other day, devoutly religious, raised in an evangelical community, and he came to me and he sat down and he said, that's it, I'm done. I can't believe in God anymore. I was like, you don't believe in God anymore? He's like, no. And then he kind of looked at me, waiting for me to make the argument to him about why I should believe in God. And he said, aren't you going to make the argument? And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not even interested in it. What I'm interested in to know is, do you still believe in love? And he looked at me like, yeah, that's all I got to believe in. I said, well, that's good, because the book you were raised with says God is love. If you believe in God, if you believe in love, you believe in God. Welcome back. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said to me, why didn't anyone ever make that argument before? And I said, I don't know. But I think they were. Every time somebody hugged you and said, try harder, they were making that argument, right? And you maybe just weren't listening because you're a young kid, right? But I think what happens in regards to this institution of stability of the church is what happens over time is that young people, again, it's a bit of this wobbling effect, right? So, for example, they don't see the stability that once came from this kind of thing, right? And it begins to wane. Let's talk about the third one. I know some of you are saying, can we take a break here? And I know just stick our head in cold water and come back. There's more. How about the third one? And I think this is maybe one of the more intriguing ones, and it's the instability of the institution of stability that we call the state, for lack of a better term, okay? I remember this one vividly. It was the year Steve Spielberg produced his film, Saving Private Ryan. And Spielberg had made no bones about the fact that the first 20, 25 minutes of that film, he made specifically for the very students I was teaching. He wanted them to be aware of what that was and what the sacrifices of that time were. And I was talking about it with my students, and I noticed that one of my students was kind of giving me that, come on, McGee, look. And I have a rule in 303 that says, as long as you show respect, you can say what you feel. So I called on him. I said, what are your thoughts? And he said, I don't want to upset you, but can I tell you the truth? And I went, yeah. And he said, here's the truth. Here's the truth. We don't see those guys as heroes. We see them as saps. They were deluded saps who were about to take bullets in their head, and they didn't even know why. And they were going to get sent home in boxes. We don't see them as heroic. We see them as pathetic and sad. Now, I had promised myself early on that when I stepped in front of kids, I was going to try and actually hear what they were saying and not just come over and rip their throat out, you know what I'm saying? And I will tell you, I will confide to you, this has not always been an easy promise to keep to myself. And this was one of those moments, right, where, I was just ready to tear his little head right off, How could he? But then it hit me. See, you're born with the color of your eyes. You're not born a patriot. Telling a kid to be patriotic is not going to make that kid patriotic. Being a patriot is a choice that is made only when certain kind of values are internalized. Are you hearing what I'm saying? And I think that we've kind of come to realize this within our culture. All kinds of data, but I mean, I like data that's not so professional. Go to a ball game at a high school game and watch during the national anthem. That's all I gotta do. Take your eyes away from our beloved flag for just a second and scan the crew and look for the kiddos, beginning at very young, who are often not made to stand at attention by the adults. Why? Because a lot of times they're there at even 8, 9, and 10 at a ball game unattended. Have you noticed this? They're not even with their parents, back to institutional stability #1. Right? Got me? In other words, it's just something that you do and, oh wow, she sang way pretty, huh? Got me? This moving away from this institution, I mean, we got all kinds of data. You can take a look at, for example, our sign-ups for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts of America, kind of, are ways to interpret some of this. There is definitely a changing in the way we think about politics. Our young people hear the TV and the radio talking heads, both left and right. And all of those voices are actually telling them one thing, and that is, everything is screwed up. That's what they're really hearing. They don't hear why it's screwed up. They just hear everything is screwed up. And what does that tell them? Well, it tells them the same thing about the institutions of both family and church. You're kind of alone, and it's really not sure how good the future is going to be. I ask my seniors every year, when you are your parents' age, and they all go, and I say, stop it. When you are your parents' age, will you be financially better off, worse off, or the same? When I started asking that question 26 years ago, 27 years ago, I would get most of my students who would say, things will be way better for me. I go, no, not so much. So there's this kind of sense that, uh-oh, it's kind of like the cultural uh-oh. Now our 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds, they can't articulate what we're talking. We're talking adult speak here, aren't we, right? Kids will manifest this kind of uncertainty in other ways. I think it makes sense for us to be, as leaders, attuned to that and to be aware of why it might be the case that a young person doesn't just so quickly bond with another adult and say, I trust you, I believe what you're telling me is true. There may be reasons for that we maybe as leaders have ignored long enough. I think it's time that we embrace some of these in an assessment of our own history and say, without beating ourselves up either individually or as a group. I mean, I just finished a lecture where I asked my seniors to imagine that in an afterlife, the first person they meet is their great-great-great-grandma, and they died at night. And they show up to say to their great-great-great-great-grandma, it's so hard. Life is so hard. You don't understand. I got all this stuff I got to do, and I'm supposed to graduate. Right? And can you imagine? I asked them, what the eyes of your great-great-grandma looking back into you to say, really? This is what you have done with all that we did for you. This is it. This is the 17, 18 years you're going to say you called a life? And in that moment, my seniors have to come to this realization that, yeah. That's the challenging news. Okay, I could just walk out of the room and we could all go, and I have colleagues that will take it that far. And I'm troubled by that. I'm troubled by that because I think there's other news. And here again, I said, you can either see this as a challenge or an opportunity. I love to see it as an opportunity, okay? Let's talk a little bit about what I see as very, very hopeful. And you knew the T word was coming, so let's talk about it, technology. I intentionally stay away from a lot of it just to irk my students off, you see. But There is no denying that what Steve Jobs did in changing the landscape of the world for us, that see it as new. See, that's the thing. These kids starting school in the fall, they don't see technology as new. They don't have the perspective that we have. For them, it is their life, right? And they carry this technology with them in so many ways that it just becomes a part of who they are and, dare we say it, what they are, right? I mean, it's kind of their identity. Let's talk for a few minutes about this. I don't know. It's interesting to me the ways that this has become a part of normal culture. So, for example, one of my top students last year came to me and said, you know, I can appreciate the lectures on Shakespeare and Milton. Please answer this one question for me. I am a science, math person. Why do I got to do all this humanities? I mean, really? See, I didn't say it. I just kind of said it, Mr. McGee. And I said, well, think about it this way. In science, math, we know how to make airplanes, correct? Yeah. We know how to make buildings, right? Right. And we know how to explain why when airplanes fly into buildings, they fall down and lots of people die, right? Science will do that for us, right? But at no point will a science method ever tell us whether it was the right or the wrong thing to fly those planes in those buildings. For that, you need the humanities. What do you think? I think that instead of speaking against technology, I think it's far more important for us to ask the question of how has technology changed and continuing to change the kiddos that we see, and how do we then adapt, we as adults, adapt to the evolving kiddo with that handheld, as I just call it in one term, the handheld device, right? That really in some ways becomes a part of their palm, right? For example, I mean, I'll just give you a hint of this. I'm teaching Frankenstein right now. I'm lecturing on Frankenstein right now to a group of my seniors back in my room. They are watching a lecture that I gave before, and now they're watching me lecture. As one of my students said as I was leaving, there's no way to get away, you know how this are. But you know, this is part of the technology that I'm very excited about. The capacity to be able to take a lecture or an instructional model, put it on YouTube, and have students not only within Washakie School District watch it, but all over the world to watch this stuff. That to me kind of excites me. There's this new movement in education that we call the flipped classroom, where, for example, I ask students to watch some material before they come to class. So they've already watched it, and of course they all watch it on their handhelds. Nobody watches this on a computer screen anymore, right? They just watch it on their phone. The advantages here as well as for our kiddos who are always on the road doing ball trips and the like, right? So I'm able to communicate with them. They can communicate back with me. I think that these technologies have made our students, can I say this without insulting us? Because at first, and it continues to kind of insult me, but I think they're in some ways more sophisticated than we were when we were their age. Notice the word sophisticated carries with it almost a more positive than a pejorative meaning, right? I think they are more sophisticated, and I think at times we can find ourselves as adults and leaders a little bit imbalanced when we meet a young person who does work so fluently with technology. And all of a sudden we come back to Whitman's Destroy the Teacher. He most honors my style who learns under it to destroy the teacher. The job of the teacher is to make the student better than the teacher, a better swimmer than the teacher. Our job as leaders is to make these young people transcend us, move beyond us, be better than us. Well, now that's a very disturbing thing, because like I point out to my seniors, if a fifth grader were to walk up to one of my seniors and say, sit down, I have 3 things you need to know. Right? My senior's like, excuse me, but I'm the one who's old enough to tear your little head off. You're going to listen to what I have to say, and in that moment, as I say this to my seniors, I say, now you know how your parents feel when you say, let me explain to you why I have to go to Warped Tour in Denver for a weekend without you. It actually happened, I'm just saying. She did not go to Warped Tour. Okay? Not that I know about, anyway. Thank you. So that's my assessment, and pardon the poverty of it. I think those of us who work with kids all the time, and guess what, that's all of us. Right? It's like I keep telling my seniors, your parents, you just don't realize it. We don't. Guys, how did you learn how to be a senior? You learned it when you were 5th graders and you went to ball games. Oh, that's how seniors walk. Oh, that's how seniors act. Oh, they're watching you. I say they're watching you all the time. You don't get to choose whether they watch you or not. It's how you learned it. It's how they're learning it. Question, are you prepared right now to say to all the 5th graders in our district, grow up to do senior year just like me? All the choices, all the actions, just like me. And if you're not prepared to say that, then you better start tomorrow, huh? Because that's the only way you can say sorry to 5th graders. Because they don't hear sorry. They only see sorry. Am I right? I mean, that's the essence of it, it seems to me. So that's the assessment of where we've been. I want to talk for a few seconds now about going forward in the vision. And now as we talk about leaders and leadership, and when I talk to future leaders, as I often like to do, I like to point out that it all is to me about perspective. And so I want to share with you a perspective not of my own making. None of what I'm sharing with you is of my own making. I'm going to work now with an American philosopher named Ken Wilber, who's provided an integral model that, for my money, is working pretty well to understand how we work with kids going forward and how we try to be leaders in the lives of these young people. We're going to call this the integral perspective, and I'm just going to, you can write this on your own paper, but I'll suggest that you do this right here, okay? That you do that right there. And then I'm going to suggest that above the top of the left side, here, down the side, go ahead and write singular and write plural. And then across the top, write interior and write exterior, or inside, outside, okay? You got me? So that's the extent of my technology performance. How's that? Everything else you can work with on your paper. So above the top, you're going to write interior, exterior. And along the side, you're going to write singular, plural. Now, what I love about theorists of the 21st century, like Wilber and Howard Gardner and others, is that they constantly remind me, as a leader, both in the classroom and outside, as they can remind you as well, that anytime we look at a human being, we are actually not looking at a single student. We're actually looking at 4 students. Now, that's important for us to realize. We're probably looking at more, but for sure 4. And this language I like, the 4 quadrants. It's simple, we can talk about it, and it makes sense, I hope, to you as we go through it. The upper right quadrant, exterior single, is what we will simply call the biology, the physiology, the outside, and of course, the brain. Any young person coming to us has a brain. Now, as a parent, I often debated whether that was true, but of course we do know. And there's lots and lots of brain-based research out there that says, are you ready for this? Young people right now this fall who are starting school, their physiology of their brain is actually different from the students that started a quarter century ago, half century. Their brains are different because of a number of things. Nutrition, we know that's a huge one. Exposure to any number of different types of chemicals in the air, the water, the food, etc., etc. We know all about, of course, the effects in regards to technologies and the way technologies are affecting vision and all of that kind of stuff. I just saw in Huffington Post an article, as this, the universe gives you what you need. 16 is the new 21, but I didn't need to know that because I raised 2 daughters. And we would go down to Denver, and I would, because I don't like shopping in malls, I would just sit in the mall, and all I had to do was to look at the middle school-aged young people that were walking by me. All you have to do is go to a ball game in Plano, Texas, and watch the 8th grade football team and know those are not boys, okay? They're playing 8th grade football, but those are big, big kiddos. You know what I'm saying? Physiologically, the young people that we're working with have changed, right? And because that's the case, when we look at our young people and we're helping them to guide them, we have to take into consideration, I think, this perspective, this quadrant. But that's not all. Let's go over to the second one. That is to say, the upper left quadrant. Here we're going to talk about inside. This is the mind. Right? So for example, I'll say to my students, where is your mind? Well, it's in my brain. So if I cut your brain open right now, I'll find your mind. I'm interested to know what color it is and what weight it is. No. So where's your mind? You do have a mind. See how this works, right? I want to have a mind. How do I know I have it? You see what I'm saying, right? Okay. So this is the quadrant that we're in, right? We're in this upper left quadrant. And here, although I could talk about it for a long time because it's one of my favorite places to talk about, especially young people, right? I want to just talk about values for a second because I was mentioning that earlier, okay? Now, it seems fairly clear to us that value development happens in 3 stages. Kids move from an egocentric point of view in the world. Everything is about me. Me, 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 me. But at some point, somebody comes along and bangs them over the head and says, yeah, not so much. And they move to a second stage, which we will call the ethnocentric. My group, my tribe, my town, my country. You see, okay, whatever that is. And they begin to adopt the values of a second party, of another group, right? And they're told how to behave within that. But that's not actually the end of it. And we know this is true. Because students can sit at night on their technology and they can visit with kids in Denmark, Japan, and Australia. You know, they're playing games with them, for example, and stuff. So, for example, when they hear the question, is America the greatest country in the world? The first thing that hits their brain is, well, of course I'm going to say America's greatest country in the world, but that's because I wasn't born in Denmark. The kids I'm playing games with from Denmark, they obviously think that Denmark's the greatest country in the world, or so they should. That's their country. The third movement in value structures is what we will call a world-centric view. They move from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric. Which is why just the other day when a young student graduate of mine came back from college and she brought home her significant other that she was totally in love with, and he was a person of color. And she could not understand why her parents were like, whoa, 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 we need to have a conversation, and I mean now. Well, what has happened here? Well, we can speak now in clinical language. You have parents who are possessing an ethnocentric worldview, and you've got a young person that's already left the ethnocentric worldview. What are you talking about? Just because this person is a different color doesn't, I mean, what's that got to do with anything? You see, all of a sudden, this ability to comprehend when we are moving from an ethnocentric to a world-centric position, values, is very important to being leaders, I think, in the 21st century. Increasingly, our young people are going there faster, of course, than we are. And how are they getting there? Lots of times it's technology. The arguments that were the old arguments don't often make as much sense to them. They do one of these. Which means what? There are no rules, there are no morals, there are no ethics. Like I like to say to my students, to say there are no ethics is to posit an ethic. Sorry. To say there are no absolutes is to posit an absolute. Sorry. That's the performative contradiction. You're going to have to think harder than that to stay with me. Right? Obviously there are rules. Obviously there are laws. Obviously there are absolutes. The question is, what are they? And how do they, if they do, change over time? That is a conversation that we as leaders have with our young people going forward. Or we don't. And if we don't, I think that's catastrophic. That's my own view, but I think that's catastrophic. Howard Gardner is a great example of this in the upper left, and then I'll move on. He says, our problem for too long in schools is that we thought about intelligence as a single thing, right? It's one thing. If you can do the ACT, you're smart. If you can't, right? He said, well, what about all the kids that can, for example, go out on a dance floor and dance, or can go out on the gym floor and produce, you know, and all the other. What about the kid who loves to do art but doesn't do the ACT well? He called it multiple intelligences, and it radically changed the way we thought about schooling. Two things about that. It's very easy to give a student a little diagnostic where he or she can quickly find what his or her top intelligences are, right? Interestingly, school is all about mathematics, linguistics. #1 intelligence last year among my students, #1 was music. Go figure. See how that works, right? So I make the observation, here's the only problem. You're going to graduate and go to the university or the college, and guess what? Everything's still going to be driven by linguistics, mathematics. So it makes sense to identify that while music is your primary intelligence, let's begin to build towards a little bit stronger intelligence in those other areas too. Notice, I didn't tell them that they were idiots because all they like to do is listen to iTunes, right? But I said, listening to iTunes has a tremendous influence on who and what you are. I said it this way to my students the other day, back to values, and then I'll leave it. Think about this. You can quote verbatim every word of every song on your iPod. They were telling me they can't memorize poems. It's too hard. And I said, most of you have over 1,000 songs on your iPod, and you can quote the lyrics to every single one of those songs. What if I hit the print key for all those lyrics, and I read them? What I'm reading is who you are, what you believe, what you hold to. what you think is important. Are you ready for me to hit that print key? And it was interesting, several of them were like, yeah, not so much. That is not good. I need to rethink that one. Right. I mean, they're aware. You don't need a parental explicit note on the cover. Kids are aware of what they're listening to. That's probably not healthy here. But we have to find some language to talk to them about it, because telling them so only makes us, you're just nothing more than an ethnocentric thinker, and I'm a world-centric thinker, and I'm way beyond. See how that works? See? So we got to have a language, I think, to talk to kiddos. In the lower left, this is the cultural quadrant, and man, oh man, is it important. I mean, think about the statistic of the number of students in years past who left our community and then would never leave our community. You know what I'm saying? They were here, they worked, they became an influential part of our community. Increasingly, for socioeconomic reasons, we're asking our kiddos to move and go away and not come back for really long times. Understand what that means. We're a town of 5,000 people asking them to move to a town of 2 million. Whoa! Where's the class on that? I know where core curriculum stands on mathematics, but that's a way more important question, right? I mean, it seems to me that that's a way more important question. How do you address something like that? Well, my colleague Doer is about to take a whole bunch of young people, put them on a plane and fly them to Washington, D.C. for a week. They're going to walk around and see the monuments. Amazing. What's even more amazing is that for some of them, this is the first time they're going to see a city. You know what I mean? And I've done it, so you don't sleep at night because you're aware when you're walking those streets, you just pray and nothing bad happens, right? But this is one way, among a lot of ways, that we can begin to kind of help our young people see there is a larger culture out there. You are a small culture of a small part of the world. Learning about other cultures is, of course, a powerful part of this. And I think as leaders, we need to do as much as we can to help these young people appreciate this. On the last one, and I could go on at length about it as well, this is the kind of the socioeconomic quadrant. And it's only in the last 50 years that we've really in schools begun to address the issue of poverty. Because when I say the word poverty, notice how our language is strange. When I say the word poverty, you think I'm saying the word poor, right? And nobody wants to think of themselves as poor, so therefore nobody is poverty-stricken. When I use the term poverty, I mean lacking. And that's a different word, lacking. Because I was already talking about the ways in which our young people come to us lacking any number of things. But we are aware that the young people last night who did not get a meal at all, who showed up, for example, at school today without a meal from last night, and the only meal maybe they'll have today is that little meal that they probably won't eat fully. Why? Because they want to get to recess. Right? We are aware how that has an influence on that quadrant that sits right above it, their brains, and our capacity to be able to relate to them in terms of value structures, the top left quadrant, and the way in which they understand the culture that they live in, as some people got it and some people don't, that lower left quadrant. You see how all this starts to come together. I mean, of course, we know that Karl Marx is the one who tried to make the argument that that quadrant is so important because it's all about class. Everything is about class. Of course, we're sophisticated enough to move way beyond that idea. But his insight was an important one for that observation, that we see the world through the economic eyes we're raised in, and young people don't have a sense of that at all. It's like I asked my seniors, if last night you slept under a bridge in Detroit, some are, how would you be a different you than you are right now? I mean, really, think about that. How would you have been different if you'd been born a crack baby? Are you telling me all of the opportunities that you've enjoyed would have come your way? Well, I don't know. Maybe see how that works, and then at least we're thinking about this. My challenges to my students is to say, leave the world a better place than you found it. Leave the world a better place, a more awakened place than you found it. That can only happen in two steps. One, you gotta help yourself, and then and only then can you help other people. The challenge going forward. Well, the question in the final analysis is, what is it that we really need to teach? And I love our attempts in projects of all kinds. The core curriculum being one of them, and of course, I was a part of, at both the state level and the national level, conversations about the core curriculum, and it's a subject of huge debate. And programs are programs. They're tools. That's all that they ever are. And the minute that anybody thinks otherwise, well, then we've got problems with the program, obviously. But the real question is, what is the point of learning? What is it that we're supposed to be learning? And so I often will tell a little story that some of you maybe have heard before, and if so, I apologize. My kid, Mikey, he wanted a bike. So I said, all right. So I bring home this bike. I get it out of my truck. We're down in front of him, brand new bike. He looks at it, and then he sees those wheels on the back of the bike. He goes, what's that with the wheels on the back? I said, son, those are training wheels. They help you know how to ride. Take them off. They make me look dumb. I said, no, you don't understand. Get on the bike. He gets on, how you do it. On the bike, he goes, starts to lean. Why don't we grab a little tighter as we fall? No, we'll leave love out. Okay, that's another class. So, and all of a sudden the wheel, I said, see? Training wheels. Oh, my Mikey was great. All over the neighborhood, riding all over the place. One day I'm watching a ball game Saturday. He comes in, I say, what's up? He goes, Dad, I think it's time I learned to ride my bike without my wheels, training wheels. And I say, cool. A couple of days later, he comes home from with his mom in a van, and I'm standing out there next to this bike. Mikey gets out the van. He looks at me. I say, son, today's the day. It's going to be great. Let's go. Mikey, he looks at me and I don't think today is a very good day. I said, what are you talking about? It's beautiful outside. We're going to go right out here on the front, drive. It's going to be awesome, right? Your mom, she's going to videotape. It's going to be great. No, I don't think today. How come? My Mikey, he's scared. I said, so what's the problem? He said, I'm kind of worried I might fall down. I said, oh, son, you got no idea. We're about to go out here in the front. You're going to ride this bike. You're going to fall down and jack yourself something off. It's going to be terrible. Let's go. Right? I mean, I'm giving this gig down in Houston years ago, and this mom, she says something to me about, failing students. I said, I deeply respect students' right to fail. Oh, Mr. McGee, you don't believe that. I said, sure I do, and so do you. Is that your daughter sitting next to you? Yeah. Did you teach her how to ride a bike? Yeah. Did you know before she was going to fall down and hurt herself on that bike? Yeah. That sounds like child abuse to me. See, because we've forgotten something, and I work to try to share this with my students. We've forgotten something about learning, right? All learning involves fear and pain. It just does. It's part of what makes us human, right? So out we go. My Mikey on the bike. You know how you do this thing? Of course, some of us have done this, right? We learned leadership in this moment, right? Here we are, right? Okay, Mikey goes, yeah, what? I said, son, I'm not going to push you all around this block. You got to pedal. Mikey's forgotten how to pedal now. You know how you do this thing, right? Pedal now, you're doing great, all of a sudden, it's awesome. He's doing it. I'm like jumping up and down, yay, Mikey. You know butt's coming, right? Yeah, you know butt's coming. Now, let's be clear. Mikey knew how to use his brakes. You rotate them backwards. Mikey knew that the city engineer had put the curb there. He had seen it before. Oh, it was a brutal jack. Right, I mean, over the handlebars, elbows, knees. Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I come running up. Mikey is so mad. Push the bike off. Look at all this in video. It's awesome. Push the bike off. This guy's little bloody knees pulled up. I come running up. I go, oh, son, that was awesome. Let's get out. Come on. We got to do it again. My Mikey,